Recording in progress. And that made Dennis and Wilda leave. They don't want to be on film. It's fine. Oh, there they are. They're back. Here they are. Yeah, so hello and welcome, everybody. I sent up lots just because there seemed to be more interest in this one than normal. And normally we can fill 3 to 4 tables for Christian education. So I just wasn't sure how many were going to show up. So I tried to set up too much rather than too little. May do it for a couple of weeks just to see, as people said, it's right first back to school and all that kind of stuff. So anyways, we'll play with that. And of course, it's hybrid as well. So we will, I'm going to try and do this so that they can see you as you talk. I'll use my kind of phone to do some filmography. Yeah, there's my mom coming in. And yeah, we'll kind of go that way. So anyways, it's good to have you all here. Hopefully you can see the screen okay, and that'll help us feel like we are in community. Mom, I'm just going to mute you while you get yourself set up there. Okay, well, I'm going to pray and then I'll get going. Lord, it's so good to be doing something like this again. It's been a long time over the course of COVID, and again, the wonderful ability to use technology, that's just been great. But there really is something about an in-person setup that is quite energizing. And so we pray, Lord, that you would help us again to feel connected, particularly those who are interfacing online. We pray that this would be a really good conversation and dialogue. Lord, we thank you for the mind and the person of C.S. Lewis, the way that you formed, shaped, and developed him and his story, the way that you gave him gifts of writing, articulation, storytelling, and thinking. They continue to contribute to your church today. And so we are gathered here in your name, Jesus, because we desire to be learners. We desire to hear from the wider church, and we want to hear from Lewis. So we pray, Holy Spirit, that you would come, that you would give us the ears to hear and the eyes to see, as we talk about some of the theological themes that are arising from Lewis's work. We pray for good conversation. We pray for the good dynamics of communication, the willingness to listen to the other person, not to answer or to argue, but to hear and to understand. Take a moment to think and reflect, and then to add to rather than negate. Pray that you would help me as I seek to facilitate, not to take over the discussion, but to help this group engage in good conversation. And in all of this, Lord, this is about the discipleship to Jesus that you have called each one of us to grow and develop as disciples of Jesus. And I think Lewis is a good teacher. I think Lewis has something to say to us. And we recognize that he is also embedded in a particular time and culture. And so we want to be able to do some good hermeneutics as we interact with him. So Lord, for all of these good gifts, we bless your name. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Just in case you hear voices and they're not coming in here, Al-Anon does meet in the West Wing, which is one of the reasons why we meet in here. Okay, well, We're so excited to be doing C.S. Lewis together. Tonight, we're looking at the first half of the book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Our homework assignment tonight was to read the first 9 chapters in preparation of some discussion. I recognize that not everybody is extroverted and is, chomping at the bit to say exactly what they think as they read. But I do want to encourage you that this is a safe space. You're not going to be attacked or put down for your ideas. And it's really good to hear from each other. This is described as theology of C.S. Lewis. And my hope is that it will be that, but it will also be to some degree theology of David Schuhart, since I'm facilitating and I'm engaging with Lewis. So I am not here to tell you that everything you hear from me is 100% Lewis. There's quite a bit of Schuhart mixed in there. So, we will pray at the end that the Lord would separate the wheat from the chaff, and that'll be good. Okay, so like I said, we're going to start with the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. It's interesting. In this book, Lewis has some essays on writing for children that are really interesting and worthwhile. He picks the fantasy genre on purpose. He doesn't see that as childish at all. In fact, George MacDonald, which is kind of the master through whom Lewis came to faith, moving from atheism to Christianity, specialized in fantasy, telling fairy stories, particularly as a coming of age. And so Lewis is great at the task. You may know that he worked with and socialized with J.R.R. Tolkien. They were good friends, and and more than just that as well. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Michael Ward, who writes a very interesting book called Planet Narnia, makes the proposal. There are some who see Lewis wrote this book called Miracles, and it was fairly attacked by a well-known philosophy professor. And it seems like most people would agree she trounced him. She refuted him. And so some people will say that, hi there.
Is this for me?
No, this is not. Are you looking for the
ACOA?
Yeah, so that is at the community center. You're at Northview Community Church right now.
Oh,
Yeah,
it's just
somebody will come and show you. So there are those who think that he, having been beaten by a woman, no less, retreated and started to write children's fiction. Michael Ward suggests that he wasn't beaten, wasn't licking his wounds, that he wanted to say the same thing in a different genre. And so that this and this are actually the same thing. So that's something to keep in mind as we read, that while it is a fairy story, while it is written for a child, it doesn't mean that it's childish. And so we want to take it serious tonight. Okay, I'm going to finish opening up this Zoom link. Here we go. Start. Okay. Right, and then I just need to flip that. Now, you guys are being seen, right? Good. Okay, good. Yeah, it's very surreal what's going on here. Okay, so our first 9 chapters starts off, of course, with Lucy looks into the wardrobe. I'm just going to put down this camera angle for a second while I open up my own book. This is going to require interaction from you guys. So as we get into the story, Lewis quickly just sets it up. So this is set, of course, in World War II. The kids have left London. They've gone to this old house. Now, in the series, this is the first book that Lewis actually writes. So you may be familiar with The Magician's Nephew, which is the first book in reading order. But that was not written at the time that this was written. So you keep that in mind. So yes, Professor Kirk is Diggory, but for our purposes, that's not necessarily all fleshed out at this point. But we have Professor Kirk. He himself was a very old man with shaggy white hair, which grew over most of his face as well as on his head, and they liked him almost at once. But on the first meeting, when he came out to meet them at the front door, he was so odd looking that Lucy, who was the youngest, was a little afraid of him, and Edmund, who was the next youngest, wanted to laugh and had to keep on pretending he was blowing his nose to hide it. So, any thoughts on the appearance of Professor Kirk?
Santa Claus.
Santa Claus.
Yes.
Okay,
As a sort of Santa Clausy.
okay. The beard and wild hair and odd looking. Okay. Other thoughts? So I have my shaky cam.
Don't know, other than that.
Okay. Well, I wondered if Lewis might be placing in his story. I think this is a prophet. I think of John the Baptist and kind of that oddness, that out in the wilderness-ness. And as we get to know the professor, he certainly holds wisdom, seems to be the source of wisdom for the children. And so maybe he's kind of like a wizard character. I wondered about the beard and odd looks and kind of that sense of fear and even funniness. Perhaps he represents wizard, the scientist, you know, he's a logical mind, that kind of thing. Anyhow, that was a thought. Well, and then as we go, I want to make this more interactive. So I don't want to just flip through the book and say this, like I made notes of stuff that I thought. As you guys read the first chapter, anything stand out to you? I'll try to do this a little differently.
It's weird.
It is weird.
It's weird because these kids who are coming from London and probably the slums of London, getting dumped into this house 10 million miles from anywhere, and they're just dumped there,
Okay,
and they don't seem to be at all distressed by it.
right.
They greet the professor in the evening, I guess, or at dinner time, and then they take off to bed.
Yeah,
Their response is very strange.
okay,
Like they're not homesick. They're like little adults.
yeah,
At a hotel almost.
right.
Right.
Which I would think is part of the wartime experience, right?
Though anything that I've read by those kids, it was devastating. They did not arrive in a cheerful mood.
Right.
They arrived in 6 shapes of collapsedness.
Well, and Lewis is not writing a realistic historical depiction.
And he doesn't know a lot about kids.
That's true. Yeah.
And that's the other thing that I think shows up.
Yeah.
Makes them more like small adults.
Yep. Okay. Any other thoughts as you went through your first chapter?
Gets to it pretty quickly, like the wardrobe.
Yes.
There isn't a lot of preamble, character development. Or
Yeah.
You're there. You're there.
I
in
think
the
it's a
morning.
theme of curiosity for both him and the children.
Yes.
He lives on his own. he's out, far out, doesn't have children. There's a curiosity to learn and be willing to be a helper. But then for the children, each of them have their own sense of curiosity.
Yes.
Maybe that beats the fear that should have been, or,
Yeah. Yeah.
but yeah.
That's a good observation. Did I hear an online person contribute?
I did start to say something, but I'm not sure it's still applicable. But when Carol was talking about the kids' reaction, part of me sort of, my mind went to that they're in England and it's, you know, the stiff upper lip, you know, you don't show your emotions, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And Peter was like the parent.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they had, but I agree, it was still kind of strange, but
Yeah.
I think it's a different cultural
Yes.
thing too, that we have to
Yeah.
remember.
Well, and duty was a big part of it, right? Like that was their contribution to the war is be cool, man. Just go do what you need to do kind of thing. So we don't have to worry about kids.
Who wore the rows of coats?
That's a good question.
I mean.
I didn't hear your question.
Who wore the rows of coats, like double rows of coats in this
Yeah.
wardrobe?
Mhm.
And there's one man living in the house.
Yeah. So property, because it would have been passed on, right?
Mhm.
One of the things that stood out to me was the rows of doors. I'm just trying to see if I can find it. Oh, here it is. And then came 3 steps down and 5 steps up, and then a kind of little upstairs hall and a door that led out onto a balcony, and then a whole series of rooms that led into each other and were lined with books, most of them very old books and some bigger than the Bible and a church. It reminded me in, I think it's Mere Christianity, where he talks about other religions that God has placed himself in every kind of religion, like even the myths tell something, has a seed of the true faith to it, so that it's kind of like a row of doors. You can enter through that door, but ultimately you need to be ushered into the right room. And it felt like that kind of description of the hallways with rows of doors is kind of that, right? And ultimately these kids are led into the right room, as it were. An interesting thought to me. Why does Lucy try the door? Try the wardrobe door? What compels her to do that? They all go in. It's an empty room, except for a vase and a wardrobe. Everybody else tromps out. Lucy decides to try the door. Curiosity? Yeah, yeah.
Calling.
A calling. Unpack that a little bit. What do you mean by that?
If this, and this book is sort of reflective, a metaphor for Christianity, it's kind of how we all come to faith.
Hmm,
We get called in some way.
okay,
And this is probably kind of reflective of her call
okay,
into the wardrobe.
okay.
that she's
So
entering into.
one could say that Lucy was meant to open it.
And I find it interesting that she's the youngest one. That senses that call, right? And goes and she's the one that opens it, even though she knows maybe it will be locked, but she still tries.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
she's the youngest one, leading the way there.
And a woman.
And a woman. I paid attention.
So any Lord of the Rings fans? All right.
I like the books.
Yes, the book.
Mhm.
That's What else would I be talking about? Not waste each other's time here, Michelle. So one of my favorite lines in Lord of the Rings is when Gandalf is speaking with Frodo and says that Bilbo was meant to find it. And if that's the case, then Frodo was meant to have it. And if he was meant to have it, then that's good news, because there may be something kind of arranging things here. And this moment of Lucy staying behind, dragging her feet, trying the door. I mean, what would she have been looking for in a door that she thought was locked? It's a possibility, is all I'm saying. As we think theologically, we get into big discussions. Is everything predetermined? Do we have free will? And of course, again, Free Methodists, we tend to be a little more both and, that God is at work in the world, but that does not negate our will, and that his strength, his power, he has the ability to accomplish what it is he desires to accomplish. He can accomplish his will, as it were.
And maybe that's why the other children didn't open the door, is maybe they were called, but it was actually Lucy who listened to the
Okay.
call.
Okay.
Because because he is going to find his will
Mhm.
in everything, right? And so
Right.
he will find the person to go through the door.
Okay. That sounds a little bit like Abraham and his father. His father seemed to be heading out to the far country first, and then stopped, buried his son, and Abraham took up the journey. Maybe.
A little child shall lead them.
Oh, and the child shall lead them. Very nice. And of course, if you read the acknowledgement or the dedication page, we know that Lucy is his goddaughter for whom this book was written. So that's also part of what's going on, right? Lucy is the heroine because that's his goddaughter. And in this book of Other Worlds, there's an essay that begins, it all started with a picture. So that's in reference to Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe too, that you might find enjoyable. So Lucy gets into this wardrobe and gets into an entirely second world, a world within a world. So what's going on with this? What is Lewis doing here? Think about this world within a world.
Reality that's there, but we don't see that reality.
Okay. Yeah.
This is Ben, by the way, Ben and Tina.
Yes, Ben and Tina. Welcome. Sorry, I guess I should have done introductions.
I'm Natasha.
Thank you, Natasha. We all need it.
Any other thoughts about this discovery of this world within the world?
I don't think it's within it. I think it's without it.
Okay.
Because it seems to me that this world opens up into huge expanse. So they're confined into the house, and this is what opens them up into other meaning.
Okay. Except that it's taking place within the wardrobe. So that's what I mean
Oh, no, I
by
think
within the world.
wardrobe, and you go out via the wardrobe into this great big space.
Okay.
Definitely depends
Okay.
on how you look at it.
Yeah, it does, but it's,
So we will see this again when we get to the last battle. And we'll even see it again in the Great Divorce. This theme. And what's What's consistent with our world and what's different between these two worlds?
One's cold, winter.
Mhm. And why is it cold? Why is it winter?
The light is taken from it,
The light has been taken from it?
the hope. right?
Okay,
Light and hope.
okay. Any other thoughts?
It's like evil is ruling in the world.
There you go.
Evils in the world, okay. So is that consistent with our world or different than our world?
Consistent.
Consistent. And yet it's not always winter, but never Christmas here.
There's a message of hope
Message of hope, okay,
that's consistent with our world.
okay.
It kind of opens up a mystery. This is something unusual.
Yeah,
How could this be?
Yeah.
Ask questions right away.
yeah. And we hear about the witch right away.
Yeah.
There's an enchantress that has enchanted this land, this surprising land. So that seems to be a difference.
Bring the light into it right away. Lucy's going towards this light.
Right.
She's not
Okay,
just walking around lost. There's a purpose. She's going to this light.
okay,
It's drawing it to her,
okay.
or she's being drawn to it.
So you're seeing the lamppost as having some significance.
It's
Well,
like,
Talk about that a little bit.
well, I don't know. It's just you have to be moving someplace, and Lucy obviously chose to follow the light.
Okay,
I mean, I want to build a whole story to this. I'm just trying to stay with the storyline.
yeah, yeah,
The
yeah, yeah.
parallel is, I guess, we're the same way. We try to follow some direction.
Yeah.
That we hope is the truth.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering, because we do want to stick with the story, but we also want to remember that Lewis has written the story. And so I don't know if you've ever read Shakespeare. One of the things that Shakespeare likes to do, Shakespeare writes plays. In a lot of his plays, the characters will put on a play. It's a play within a play. And by understanding what's going on within the play, we understand the play itself at a deeper level. So I think Lewis is doing a similar thing here with this other world. It's a world within a world, in order that we can see our world better, clearer. It is allegory. Now, that doesn't mean that everything that's in the story corresponds to something else. But a lamppost in the middle of a wood that's snowing in a land that's been enchanted by an evil witch, a lamppost may be a little sign of hope. I don't know if you've ever read The Hunger Games. In The Hunger Games, I was first introduced at Tyndale. I had a guy just kind of complaining. He said, "Oh, there's just no hope in this. I am so down. It's so dark." And that's always good enough to get me reading something. So I read it and I actually challenged him. I said, actually, it's full of hope. When I worked with Canadian Food for the Hungry, we would talk about signs of hope in the city. So when Food for the Hungry would go into a new village, they would kind of do an assessment. And there were 3 things that they were looking for in a village to see if there was hope going on. And there's no point investing in a village that has no hope. Village has to be able to dream in order to engage in the process of renewal. One of those things was flowers. Are flowers present? Are children present and playing? I can't remember what the third one is, but I wonder the lamppost could be a sign of hope within this world. Yeah,
Do you
Natasha.
think that the lamppost could represent like the church? Because they're saying quite often in here, well, if I can just get to the lamppost, then I know where I'm gonna go.
Okay,
If I can just find that light, then my direction is clear, you know? And Lucy meets a friend, right? At the lamppost, that's where she first meets the fawn, Thomas. And they continue this wonderful community of friendship, right? Totally blessing, right? But anyway, I just thought that was interesting that the lamppost is significant because it could represent a light in the darkness
right.
within that world, right?
Sense of direction,
A smaller light
Yeah.
than what Aslan represents, but
right.
it's still there.
Yeah. Yeah. Could also, so this is a yes and, could also represent something like common grace, right? Even in the middle of this wood, there's light.
I notice he's very careful to make the world very real and tactile, like Lucy
Yes.
touches a tree, there's the crunch of snow,
Yes,
feels the cold, it's very clearly
yes,
very real in that sense,
yes,
physical.
yes. And he does a good job seamlessly moving us from one world to the other, right? Where we're crunching mothballs to suddenly crunching snow, and we're feeling the fur of the coats on our face, and suddenly they're the soft pine needles. Yeah, there's a stuffiness and then a draft, you know, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, he moves us very well with that. That's really good. All right, well then, chapter 2, what Lucy found there. The fawn begins by asking Lucy a question. Are you a daughter of Eve? And so we hear within this story over and over again, son of Adam, daughter of Eve. What's going on? Why do we keep having this kind of reference? I mean, it's not very common to be referred to that way here, is it?
But bring the reader to realize this book is kind of rooted in Christian beliefs. Or
Okay.
religious beliefs.
Yep.
Because it right away takes you to the Bible. Adam and Eve.
Yeah. Okay. So
I also saw it as a,
go ahead, Mom.
I also saw it as another way of asking whether she was a human being.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Which for the fawn is something foreign.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What does this tell us about Narnia and its relationship to our world? Couldn't hear you, Karen. It looked like you were parting the Red Sea, though.
It's aware of the other world. Narnia is aware of
Mm-hmm.
the other world.
Mm-hmm.
The other world isn't aware of Narnia.
Mm-hmm. Although it's been a while, right? Because when we get to the Fawn's Cave, there's a few books. Is man a myth? Right? Now, Lewis is just having fun because he's studied mythology and he's been reading, you know, Arthurian literature. He was trained in the classics. So, you know, this kind of mythology, he knows, he's incorporated it in, and so he's having a little bit of fun here, right?
I think also the names are sort of gives a note to its origin,
Yes,
right? Like there
Yes.
was a beginning.
yeah,
And you're from that beginning.
yes, yeah. I wonder if it might also create a little bit of foreshadowing. story of Adam and Eve, of course, they're rooting in a creation story, but there's also a fall in that, right? So there may be a pointing to the sinfulness or brokenness that is going to become a feature in this story, which makes it a very human story then. And it doesn't just locate them, but it locates us, because we too are sons of Adam and daughters of Eve. What were your thoughts when we got to the part? So Mr. Tumnus brings Lucy back to his nice snug little cave filled with books, and he feeds her and he plays her some music, and she begins to fall asleep. And then we have kind of this confession scene, right? So I was wondering, what do you think about the relationship between the fawn's own conscience about what he has done and is doing and has proposed to do? His father, now there's my father, he would never do something like this. And his concepts of good and bad. Does the question make sense, or do we need to clarify that a little bit?
That was the one question that was, that stood out to me. That yes, he started out by doing what the White Witch wanted to do. And then all of a sudden, something came over him, knowing that this wasn't the right thing. And he stopped and went the other direction, even though knowing if he was found out, he was going to be in big trouble.
Right.
Right. So he purposely out and went the other direction, knowing that what he was doing was right, because his dad had done that.
Mm-hmm. So that gets into the question of formation a little bit. How are we formed? Is it all just conscience? It's right and wrong, a sense of right and wrong? Was he ever on the witch's side? Or what motivated him in the first place to agree or to do what he was ordered to do, which is to be on the lookout for any sons of Adam or daughters of Eve, and to report them if they are found?
Fear.
Fear. Okay.
She probably threatened. That's what I imagine.
Yeah.
But sure, in theory, he was on the witch's side. But when it comes down to it, it was the relationship that he had with Lucy. And he got to know her, what she was like, and that changed things.
Yeah.
So there is a relationship aspect here.
Yeah.
That is wonderful.
He was kept in the dark too, like the witch, obviously,
Right.
her
Yeah.
motives and such. He was unsure. He was, like you say, fear
Yeah.
was the motivator, and then realizing.
Mhm. And so what might that say to us then, as people that make moral decisions? Have we ever taken on things, behaviors that we know or had a sense were not right, but out of fear went ahead and did them anyways? It's not a moment for outbreak of confessions, but I think it happens, right? There's a lot of fear. There are pressures in behavior.
But that's sort of where discipleship comes in.
Yeah,
You know, as you come alongside people and if somebody's, just gripped with it, like the hope is that, no, we have not been given that spirit.
yeah,
That's not where you want to go.
yeah,
So, I mean, I think it's definitely a helpful aid in our struggles in the world. For sure.
yes, yes. Good.
There's a willingness too. There has to be a willingness, like, yes, to accept the fact that you shouldn't have a spirit of fear, but you have to be so trusting to go, am I ready to understand the deeper why?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And uncover some things that I don't know, or do I really want to uncover? Some of those unknowns can be pretty scary. and can be
Yes,
time consuming and can cause sacrifice. So all those pieces, right?
yes,
And
yeah,
so I agree for sure that we shouldn't have a spirit of fear, but also to go, do I have,
Yeah.
complete faith and confidence that I will be sustained through both all of the hard and the why behind it.
Right, right. And let's face it, sometimes that fear is just a trigger, right? Like it's not even the rational brain anymore. It's just, yeah, I gotta survive. I think there's a flip side for Lewis. You see it in his space trilogy in the final book. And he writes about it, not in this one, but in another collection of essays about the lure of being part of the inner circle, right? And that's kind of the flip side. It's still based in fear, as the fear or the desire to be a member of the inner circle, and the way that never actually works out, but that is a social construct that is used to get us to compromise quite a bit. So it's a little bit different than what's being presented here, but I think that Lewis has this awareness that similar to Harry Potter, right? The world does not separate between good people and Death Eaters. There is all kinds of levels of evil and reasons for it. And I think Lewis is aware of that it's not just this demonic versus angelic, but there are some fairly regular, everyday human sons of Adam, daughter of Eve motivators that cause us to compromise on conscience and on the things that we know, whether that's from formation, I believe it because my mother told me so, or what we as a society have agreed is right and good.
It kind of goes back to the reality piece too, is Fawn hadn't known what humans were like
Yeah,
before he met Lucy. So
that's right.
a lack of understanding of reality
Yes.
made it kind of easy to go, sure, I do that for you. I don't, you have an idea of maybe what they sort of could be like.
Yes. Well, and again, I think we need to be careful too, because we're embedded in this democratic society with a fairly high sense of personal authority and autonomy, right? Mr. Tumnus doesn't live in that world. Mr. Tumnus is ruled. So, imagine the conversation between Mogram, the head of the secret police, or the queen herself, saying, this is what you are to do. Would he ever agree to it? That would indicate there was an option or a choice that he could actually say no. It's that he's ordered, and it's obey or pay the price, right? And again, sometimes I think even in our own world, because I think we're meant to jump back and forth between Narnia and our world, there are times when we are motivated by all kinds of things, right? There are things that rule us that we don't necessarily see, and we agree to them without really agreeing to them. It's just the way the world works. What is a witch, and how should we feel about a witch? I know that sounds like a silly question, but it's a necessary question for our context.
Witches are bad.
Witches are bad.
Bad.
So Hermione Granger is a bad witch?
Oh, no, all that got challenged,
Okay,
but at this point in time,
yeah.
witches are bad
Why is a witch bad?
because they deal with the occult.
Right,
And in Christianity, you cannot deal with you're not to deal with the occult.
okay. So
Evil.
just to be clear, the occult is rooting into Satan, his dominion and his power. So yeah, witches are bad because they are a manifestation of hell. And you could say that's the antithesis of God, right? So if God takes chaos and establishes order, he takes the things of death and establishes life. Then Satan is about corrupting and undoing that. And so Lewis is tapping into this larger history that says, yeah, witches are bad. They are evil. In fact, they are demonic. And I ask the question because we live in a world in which not only is God dead, but Satan is dead, right? There is no devil. And so we have vampires that are lovable. You have witches and wizards who are good. And I love the stories. I think these are interesting ways to talk about things. I think they can even be helpful for moral formation. But we do have to recognize that it is a deviation from an older tradition, right? And so I just want to make sure that as we read it, we're clear. Because in writing for children, one of the things that Lewis says is when we write for children, we need a clear distinction between good and evil. Lines shouldn't be blurred. So think of Harry Potter and Voldemort. Nice, clear lines. You know that you want to be on Harry's side. You do not want to be on Voldemort's side. And that there should be nothing in the villain that should attract us to be on his or her side, right? The lady who wrote Harry Potter does a great job with Voldemort. There's nothing redeemable. You know, she uses particularly Albus Dumbledore to debunk what we might think are redeemable qualities in Voldemort. Or no, he has chosen this path intentionally. He dehumanizes himself until he's little more than a beast, right? Splitting his soul and creating murder everywhere he goes. I mean, his name literally means death. So yeah, so we are to feel no attraction for this witch. In some ways, she is a foil. In other ways, in the allegorical sense of the story, she represents Satan and the kingdom of evil.
Yes, Lewis does a good job though when he describes the white witch, right?
Mhm.
When you hear him say, well, she made it winter, but never Christmas,
Mhm.
right? And that she would saw off my horns and she would cut off my tail, right? If I do this, right? So he does a good job of describing even throughout the other chapters as to why
Yes,
we shouldn't, just like
yes,
why we shouldn't align with the white witch or find any
Yes.
redeemable qualities in her.
yes,
This is who she is.
yes,
And, you know, you see in one of the chapters, maybe she has some redeemable qualities when she's with Edmund, but, you know, it's quickly debunked,
yes.
kind of thing.
Good.
It's interesting too, it's a white witch, you know, white's usually,
Mm,
oh, that's pure, it's okay, you know, it should
Yeah.
be fine, but it's deceptive. Shows a
Yes.
deceptive nature.
Yes, yeah, yes. That's a really great observation.
It's
Uh,
rare for me.
No, I don't think it is. I don't think it's as rare as you want us to believe. But I think that Lewis does paint her that way on purpose, right? Because she is masquerading
Yeah.
as good. But the paleness of her skin, it's not a normal whiteness, right? It's like paper or icing sugar. It's the pall of death as on her, which kind of relates to, if that's who she is in character, then we have the result or the fruit of her rule is it's always winter, never Christmas. Let's talk about that for a second. What is Lewis trying to communicate with that, that language?
There's no redemption.
No redemption.
The fun part of winter isn't there, so you just have the,
No fun part of winter.
you just have the cold.
The harshness.
The
without the
harsh-
hope.
Harshness without
Ah.
hope. Good, good. Yeah, winter in literature, especially in poetry, and Lewis, at the end of the day, that's was his desire, was to be a poet. Winter is the symbol of death, right? Spring is the hope. And if there's no Christmas, then there's no move towards spring, right? He's also, again, we need to remember, he's doing this in that, right? And one of the things that he's doing is speaking against some of the philosophies of the day. And there's almost a desire to strip the world of everything that is organic, right? And that technological move to machinery, the industrial age and modernism. So again, in his science fiction trilogy, you have in one of the characters, again, I think it's in the third book, talking about the moon being the perfect world because nothing grows on it. It's dead. So he is pushing against some of the philosophy of the day. I'm probably going to talk about it a little more next week, but Michael Ward in his Planet Narnia actually demonstrates the way that Lewis writes using the planets. So he's writing from an older Renaissance medieval cosmology in which the 7 planets have influence on the world. And so you keep on having Peter in this book saying, by Jove, when Jove is a god, he's a planet. That's part of what's going on in here. And Jove was the fun one, the one that brought new life, joy. And so the winter would have been Saturn. And that was kind of what Lewis was saying. His day was born under the star of Saturn, but our faith has us reborn under the star of Jove. So that's part of what's going on here too. If you like academic stuff, Planet Narnia is just mind-blowing in its thesis. Anyways, but it's good stuff. We've already talked about fear, but before we move on from chapter 2, and we don't by any means have to cover every single chapter, so don't worry about the time and all of that. If there's something in some of the other chapters, we can just shout it out, we'll get there. But something that I want to note before we move out of chapter 2 is forgiveness occurs between Mr. Tumnus and Lucy. Talk to me about the importance of that moment for the story. What happens to the story without that moment?
It's a hard question.
If we're not ready for an answer yet, we can just hold on to it and keep moving forward.
I
That's
was
okay.
gonna say.
Yeah, go
that
ahead.
Forgiveness comes easy for Lucy. That there was no hesitation.
Mhm.
It was right there. He asked, he broke down in front of her, and she did. It's another wonderful, beautiful moment.
Mhm.
There's also confession too.
There's confession. Yes.
So, you know, from the confession, there's forgiveness.
Mhm. And a request for
Yeah.
forgiveness. Yeah,
And it was genuine.
yeah,
It's, you know, the handkerchief from her to remember you and all this kind of stuff. So
yeah.
that's kind of cool. It's, yeah, it wasn't just pat. It's sincere.
Right.
And it comes as a result of her being known by him.
Mhm.
It's this line, I just keep going back to it again and again. I can't give you up to the witch, not now that I know you.
Right.
Like he was happy in his, well, this is just what he did. But once he knew her,
Mhm.
I think acknowledging that there's been a change for him
Mhm.
makes you curious as a reader to go, what's next?
Mhm. Mhm.
Like what would be, yeah, what are the next stages or steps?
Yes.
Keeps the story going.
Yes.
We want to come back. What
Yeah.
happens to Mr. Thomas,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yes, because now he is willing to pay a price. And so there may be a cost that comes out of this. We'll have to wait and see.
Also a relationship there though, like that has formed with the forgiveness, right? I
Yeah.
mean, sometimes when we don't forgive others and it kind of hardens our heart towards that person. but,
Right.
Now she's concerned about him to make sure that he doesn't get into trouble. So there's
Mhm.
that relationship building
Mhm.
between the two.
He was also giving her counsel too,
Yes.
to be careful. There's the, everything's listening, watch what you do. So,
Right.
I
Right.
mean, that's sort of what we do as a parent
Mhm.
or in discipleship, same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're one.
Yeah.
Help guide them along.
Without that request for forgiveness and forgiveness extended, would Lucy have come back? Well, we don't know, but there's a possibility that Narnia could have been a very unsafe place then. And even if she had the opportunity to get back in, perhaps she would not desire to go back in.
Yeah.
Certainly not to visit Mr. Tumnus. Everything turns on that, right? This is Lucy that leads. If Lucy doesn't go back, she can't lead anybody back with her. And as we read, these children seem to be necessary, even though they're not essential to the story. With that, let us keep going forward. Edmund goes into the wardrobe. Did I miss a hand? No. Okay. Issues of truth here, right? So Lucy comes out of the wardrobe and she has a story to tell. We quickly find there's a discrepancy. We've been with Lucy away for hours. We've met a lovely little fawn in a nice wood. We've gone to his cave. We've had tea. We've had a little sleep. We had this whole conversation. We've made our way back. And now suddenly the others are just in the corridor. And she tells the truth. How did they receive it? Don't believe her.
Don't be silly.
Yeah,
They go looking for the physical evidence. They head back to the wardrobe.
right.
Mhm.
Thank you. Yeah, and what did they find?
Wardrobe with the back.
wardrobe. So we have two kinds of knowledge suddenly going on, right? There's some experiential knowledge. And there is scientific knowledge, as it were, experience versus fact.
The element of time is brought in there too,
Mhm.
because other kids, it was only a moment, but for Lucy, it was a long time.
Yeah,
So that's brought in
Yeah.
for some reason.
yeah. Well, and they seem to think that she, as the youngest, the baby, she's just a child, has hidden and got tired of waiting and went running, right? Is just playing a game. So I just want us to note that we're getting into some deeper water here when we come to, I mean, this is the subject of what we would call theologically epistemology, a study of knowledge. How do we know what we know, right? Jesus is raised from the dead. I think all of us here have been baptized, which is a declaration, right? We confess with our mouth and we believe in our heart that Jesus is Lord and God has raised him from the dead. That's the heart of our confession. How do you know God has raised Jesus from the dead? You met Jesus raised from the dead, right? How do we know? We know that God exists, right? But in a world that wants the facts, the hard proof, to only acknowledge the things that we can see, we can touch, how do we know what we know? So I think Lewis is putting that on the table. As Christians, I mean, that's a fair question when people say, how can you believe this? You know, death is final. How could you buy into the idea that a man has been raised from the dead? Next thing I want us to note is, why is it that the children find only the back of a wardrobe, not Narnia?
It's not the right time.
Not the right time. That's an excellent answer. It's an interesting answer. Help us to understand that answer.
I've always believed that there's things happen for a reason and that there's always the right time for stuff to happen. And if they just opened it up and it was there, would they really still believe what was happening, or would they think it was just a dream, right?
Hmm.
All of these other things had to take place before they could actually go in and go, oh yeah, it is real, right?
Mhm.
Maybe jump to chapters, but so there's like God's timing is perfect in everything,
Okay.
right?
That's what they tell me.
And it's like I've heard stories of how people will go to the mailbox 20 times waiting for a check to come in, and it doesn't come in, and they need this money for food, and it actually comes in at the exact moment that they need it
Okay.
the most.
Yeah.
Not before and not after.
Nice. Other thoughts?
There was the motivation too, motivation of the kids, that they weren't going with the heart to really truly understand it.
Right.
Yeah. So seeing things that, where's your motivation? Where's your heart at?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because it could be dangerous, like if not, that's not the right word, but like if you're not ready, God knows when you're ready.
Mhm.
He knew these kids weren't supposed to go through that wardrobe, not yet. Time will come. Well, for Edmund, it came, but could be dangerous to somebody if they just cavalier says, yeah, away I go, here I go. But their heart wasn't in it, like you said, they were just doing it maybe in their head,
Yeah.
or with their eyes. Oh yeah, that looks right, I'm gonna do that.
Yeah.
But if the heart wasn't into it, there's no fruit, it's just no labor there, you're just working.
Mhm.
There's no joy, there's no life in that.
I think originally they wanted to prove her wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
They were trying to show her that, no, this isn't
Yeah,
Okay.
what are you doing?
what you think it is.
Okay. So you don't see in their motivation a willingness to believe at this stage?
Yeah.
Okay, this is a debunking. Okay,
And she was the youngest too.
she's the youngest, yeah. Yes, the youngest often is disbelieved.
I
Um,
think too, it's essential to the story, but also just that Edmund had to go to Narnia
Okay,
first before the others
okay,
and have that whole scenario play itself out.
yes,
Because the whole thing that happens with Professor Kirk, talk about odd, that's odd, is so pivotal, I think,
yeah,
that it just has to happen that way.
okay, okay. I think part of it too is the reminder that this is all hinged on God's sovereignty.
Mhm.
We enter Narnia because God brings us in. So we'll see in one of the next books when it's the horn summons the children, and then they come to the conclusion it's not actually the horn, right? That was maybe the means that was used, but ultimately they are brought into Narnia by Aslan, right? So while there's a gateway, they are not in charge of the gateway. This is about God's sovereignty. There's also a dynamic that's going on here too. Lucy is disbelieved. Fear has been a part of Mr. Tumnus's story. Is pressure going to break Lucy? She's going to hold on to her witness. She's going to maintain what is true, or she's going to capitulate in order to fit in and be accepted. So I think there's refinement of Lucy's character going on here, which I think is particularly important for us to remember because, you know, in our day and age, often when we hit hardship, we can fall to our knees and start accusing God of not being there for us, not, you know, but perhaps there's some deeper things that are going on. And we want to be careful with that sort of theology, but it's a possibility.
I think that was interesting is that creates a long-term kind of break, like it talks about being spiteful and its days of kind of this business and stuff versus like a momentarily forgotten.
I think I missed part of your question. Could you repeat it?
I thought it was interesting that it seems to create like this break in amongst the kids for a long period of time
Yes.
and sets relationships apart versus this kind of momentary over and done with and then forgotten about and on to the next game.
Yeah. 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 This endures. I think because in part, this is revelation, right? So we've talked about the idea that worlds exist. Suddenly we're in them, we see them. I mean, that's pretty fundamental stuff, right? Because we're learning about the way the world works and we're learning about ourselves through that encounter. So this is not some small thing. And character is deeply important for Lewis and in this story, right? Character of Lucy. Now we come to the character of Edmund. What is Edmund's character in all of this, because he helps to keep it going, right? Like it probably would have ended sooner. She would have let it drop, except he keeps jeering her. Yeah. So
The
let's
weather too,
say
the weather also.
the weather.
right?
Yes.
Like, there was
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
break in the weather. So
Yes.
that kept them playing the game.
Yes. That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Otherwise, it would have been like, okay, now we're done. Off we go to do something outside.
Right. Yeah. And weather can impact moods. So Edmund gets into the wardrobe. Now, Lewis has said, I don't know how many hundreds of times, Lucy didn't shut the door because she knows it's really foolish to shut yourself the door of the wardrobe, right? We'll get that later too with the other kids, but Edmund goes in and he pulls it shut. What does this communicate to us about Edmund?
Impulsive, not thoughtful.
Impulsive, not thoughtful. Okay.
Doesn't obey rules.
Well, certainly not the unwritten ones that is just seemingly good common sense when you're in England in the 40s and you find yourself in a wardrobe.
And then endless.
Be too selfish.
Selfish. Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Arrogant too.
Say that.
Arrogant.
Arrogant. Okay.
Usually if you want to hide something, you keep the door closed. Nobody's going to see because I closed it. So
Okay.
there's that element of secrecy.
Secrecy. Okay. Okay.
I'm not sure that's what comes out of why he did that. but I mean,
Right.
It's,
Yeah. 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 My own read was that Lewis wants us to understand how foolish Edmund is. And there's a biblical understanding of foolish, which is not just a stupid person that does silly things, but the fool says in his heart, there is no God. Not that the fool is an atheist. The fool believes that God will remain silent and take no action. Right? I think Edmund's character is important at this stage. And I just think we should keep that in mind as we go forward, right? Why is it that Lucy navigates Narnia safely, but Edmund immediately falls into trouble? I think it comes down to character. And I think Lewis wants to remind us and any children that might be reading, character matters. There is good character, which to some degree has some reward. Lucy enjoys a nice tea. She's not turned over to the White Witch. She makes it safely home. She can even go back and come back again, kind of thing. Edmund is foolish.
Do you think that Edmund was a little bit curious? That he was too arrogant to show it, or he hid it? You know, there was a little bit of curiosity in him to see if Lucy was right or not, but then he hid it.
Yeah, he's kind of a sly.
He's a turkey.
Yeah, like he hasn't. He's open to the fact that she might be right after all.
Mhm. So there.
Although he's been the most outspoken at harassing her about it.
Mhm. Even after he knows it was true.
Ego too, because I can see that in like with people with Christianity too, where they're curious or they have questions, but I don't want to go there, or I'm just going to shut the door. Right?
Lewis seems to be telling us something about Edmund. We get a little later in these chapters. Peter says, you pick on the smaller kids at school too. Now we'll find out from Surprised by Joy, Lewis hated school. it was awful for him. He didn't like the other boys, he didn't like teachers and that kind of thing. It's a pretty bad experience. So we'll often see in his writings, especially in these novels, that school is not a great place, and certainly not the way it was going in Britain. And he much preferred the tutoring he did with his own Professor Kirk. The person that Professor Kirk was modeled after was a much better fit for him as an independent learner, and one-on-one, and without all the Eton jackets and all that sort of stuff. So, I mean, part of this may be his own commentary on some of his own experience, the bigger boys picking up on smaller boys, as part of the tradition of these schools. And yet Edmund gets into Narnia. I think that's significant. Does that tell us about divine grace and God's purposes?
Mysterious ways.
Right. It's certainly not only the righteous man shall pass. All are welcome. Okay.
Maybe even stronger, like he was not looking or trying,
Okay.
he was actively trying to disprove.
Right. Another opportunity to make fun of Lucy,
Yeah,
who's probably in here pretending that she's in her little magic world.
yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead, Bob. I see it.
Well, I'm just trying to like, was this a place that you really wanted to go to? Like, you know, that wasn't determined yet. Just because Lucy went to some place that was imaginary to her, but to Edmund.
Yeah.
Well, what's so great about this place? When you stepped in there, like, do I want to be here?
Right.
So to say, you know, is it God's sovereign grace or whatever? Well, right now, I think it's an unknown to him.
Mhm.
He hasn't made up, was this good or bad?
Right. Yes. If we are putting ourselves in Edmund's shoes. Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking more from the author's point of view. But yeah, that's good. That's a good point. Edmund sure
Yeah,
doesn't.
Edmund was following Lucy in the hopes that he could like ridicule her even more
Yes.
and come back and tell his siblings, oh man, I gotta tell you what happened tonight.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then finds himself in this place.
Well, just since we our time is coming to an end, just to keep with Edmund and this theme, a little later, after they're at the Beaver's house and Lewis shifts from them discovering Edmund gone to his journey. Notice that at one point, the moon comes out. He's not sure that he can traverse the way to the witch's palace, but then the clouds part, the moon comes out and he's given light to see. I think that's also, from Lewis's point of view, the divine leading that's going on. Judas is necessary to the story of Jesus, right? Jesus needs to be betrayed. Judas is the betrayer. Doesn't mean Judas had to do it, as in he wasn't responsible, but he was necessary. That triggers the crucifixion. Edmund is necessary because there is redemption of Narnia that's coming. And part of that is, at the heart of it, is this betrayal, right? We get to understand the deeper divine grace that is going on, even deeper than the winter, because of Edmund. Yeah, it's interesting. So Edmund is here. Once again, this is not by accident, even though it looks accidental. And even though it seems coincidental that at the moment he steps out, the sledge comes along with the witch. I think Lewis is telling us this isn't accidental. This is purposeful. This is part of the way Aslan is resolving the issue of this, this usurper of the throne.
And, he's also working out Edmund's redemption at the same time.
Yes, that's right. Because Edmund already comes into Narnia with formation ongoing. We all do. Right? And so there is the need for an ongoing redemption, which we'll see across the 7 stories. There is none who is perfect, none that doesn't need character growth, none that isn't changed in light of their contact with Aslan. So yeah, he is also on that path, even though it looks like he's going in the exact opposite direction of that path. It's a good observation. We've only got a few minutes left. I got more stuff, but I'm wondering, is there anything in the story that you really want to talk about, kind of get at?
Turkish delight.
Turkish delights. Okay. You don't know what that is because you're not
I know
English.
what a candy is.
Yeah.
I just wonder why that candy.
Yeah.
Isn't that good?
Yeah. Well, I don't know, but the enchanted stuff is,
Apparently it's really
you could kill yourself eating that stuff. Yeah.
Maybe for you, it wouldn't be Turkish delight.
It would
maybe
be caramel or
yeah.
a chocolate covered almond.
Right. But there's always, I
Yeah.
guess, something that would maybe sway us.
Right.
Right. Because it's really not about the food, is it?
No.
What's it about, Norma?
It's about the things that we want to hold on to in our heart that we can't let go of.
Right. He
to
sells
help us
out
to
his
see,
soul for
yeah.
Turkish delight.
For some of us, it's money. For some of us, it's things, right? For some of us, it's, I mean, maybe ministry or our work, right? Like there's all sorts of things that keep us from spending time with God, right?
And I wonder if even the way we tend to describe things, and I know I do that too, right? Those big categories, but this is a really small thing. And I think that maybe Lewis is trying to bring our attention that we sell our soul for beads, right? For magic beans, for, whatever it is.
The 8 pieces of silver or whatever it was. Judy
Right,
sold
30
us.
pieces of silver. Good, yeah.
Yeah.
It's really not worth it.
Mhm.
And yet, it seems to be so good, so important, so valuable,
At the
so
moment,
desirable
At the moment.
at the
He
moment.
needs it all and wants more.
Yeah,
That's what
And
brings him
keeps
back.
referring to asking for more too.
even though he's in discomfort, he's already eaten too much. But he wants more. Makes him feel sick, but he wants more. I mean, that could be a metaphor for our own contemporary culture, right? I mean, this iPhone is more than 2 years old. I mean, I don't even know. I still have it.
10 years old.
Okay, don't show off. Nobody likes a show. What do you think of the professor's use of logic in terms of who to believe?
Well, like Carol said earlier, he's a very odd character.
Yes,
And on the surface, the story that Lucy's telling, although we know it's true, is like unbelievable.
yes, yes,
And he kind of turns the whole thing on its head and makes them think about it in a different way.
right.
You know, which one of these two children would you say is the most truthful, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes,
And it's like, to me, the most bizarre conversation.
yes,
Lee Strobel's A Case for Christ reminds me of
okay, yeah,
that.
yes. Well, and I mean, Lewis is an apologist for the faith, so there is some of that going on. Some of that comes out of his experience with his own tutor, who, when they were walking from the ship to the tutor's home where he was going to live, I can't quite remember, but it said something about, oh, I didn't imagine the countryside would be so green or something like that, or so hilly. And the guy just snaps at him, what do you mean by that statement? He's just making conversation, but there's none of that. He said, well, did you study maps? Did you look at atlases before? So you had no idea of what you were going to encounter. Therefore, you have no foundation to think or be surprised at how green it is, right? You just, there's your first lesson in logic, right? Like, don't be stupid. So there's some of that going on here. Very Sherlock Holmesy, right?
Also
We-
very Western,
Yes, yes,
right? Like we're in a fantasy world, and if we're sort of Eastern, there is a lot of cyclical storytelling.
yes,
that makes sense in real life
yes,
circumstances, whereas this is like, no, this is logical.
yes, yes,
As I was reading through Mere Christianity, Lewis challenges everything along the way.
Yeah.
And that's sort of how his mind works. And I think
yes,
he brings that out here. through
Yes.
the professor.
yes,
You know, she's either lying or she's telling the truth or she's crazy. So,
Yes.
and that's the way he usually just decides on, well, what's truth, what's right,
Yes.
what's wrong, what's noble.
So in theology, there's a conviction that we can do theology because God is reasonable, consistent, and knowable. He's revealed himself. And so rationality, which kind of dominated theology for a very long time, is the foundation. God is knowable, and therefore we can apply logic, which is why Lewis engages in apologetics, because God desires to be known. God makes himself known, therefore God can be known. And so the same arguments that Professor Kirk says about Lucy, Lewis actually says about Jesus. We only have three options when it comes to Jesus and his claims to be the Son of God. Either he was a liar, which means he wasn't a good man, but everybody recognizes he was a good man, so he can't be a liar then. So that can't be it. Or he's crazy. There's nothing in his presentation that makes him crazy, or he's telling the truth. Now, there have been lots of philosophical people who have pushed back on Lewis on those three options, saying there's actually more than just those three options. But if we were to keep things in broad categories, we can apply that kind of thinking to the biblical stories, to the text. We talked about resurrection earlier. N.T. Wright has a beautiful volume, probably the masterwork called Resurrection of the Son of God, in which he applies similar sorts of logic to the category of resurrection, to say not only is Jesus's resurrection from the dead plausible, it's probable, because we would not exist if it were not so. Anyways, So that's some of what's going on here. And there also may be a reminder to adults to not judge too quickly, to dismiss children, to hear something fantastic and say that it has no rooting in reality. It may be that there are things to learn from our children too. Jesus seemed to think so as well.
Is that maybe why, because Susan thinks she never dreamed of growing up would talk like a professor and didn't know what to think? Was that Lewis's sort of that message?
I think so. I think that kids, the old adage, kids are meant to be silent and less spoken to, seen and not heard kind of thing. I'm not an expert on this time period. But I think Lewis is taking kids more serious than children were taken in these days, especially the youngest, right? She's a fairly young girl as well. So Lewis is pushing against some of the day's tropes, you could say. Well, my friends, time has come. Lots we didn't talk about or get to, which is okay, because a lot of the themes are going to repeat. I don't know everything about Lewis, and I'm certainly not going to make all the connections that exist. I have a pretty good reading of Lewis, and I'll try and keep bringing in connections as they come to me. But yeah. So this is kind of what we're doing. And I'm going to stop the recording here.